Truth. I'm your host, Plain, and each week we try to get into a mystery or some anomaly in the world around us and try to understand what's going on a little better. This week joining us, we have John Rappoport, who's been looking into things for decades and has found a lot that is useful and interesting on both the mundane physical kind of level and then also kind of more on the esoteric side. John, are you there? Thanks for coming.
I am indeed.
Okay, appreciate it. And along for the ride are a couple of my friends, Oolong Rabbit and Disaster Cat. Oolong, are you there?
Yep, I'm here, Plain.
Okay, and Disaster Cat.
I'm here, thank you.
Sounds good. Okay, well, let's get going. John, I thought we'd start out with kind of a topical issue, which is the, you've been writing a little bit about, which is the GMO labeling, how the food, the people trying to do that have been really failing badly, and it's really not, they're not approaching it the right way. Would you care to comment on that?
Sure. Well, basically, my criticism stems from the fact that they're forwarding a single message, which is people have a right to know what's in their food, which of course is true. But is that the most effective way to carry out a campaign against giant biotech companies like Monsanto? And in my experience, the answer is definitely no. Because people need to know why they have a right to know what's in their food. In other words, what is in their food, GMOs, and what is the problem there? Why does it make any difference whether they know or not? And this has not been front and center in either of the two big campaigns in California and the state of Washington, both of which have lost. So I've been urging people in that direction. You have to go on the attack. You have to specifically mention GMOs, and you have to specifically mention these companies that are taking over agriculture in America and other countries, corporate giant agriculture, and point out the dangers to health of GMOs, and also the very real dangers of the herbicide Roundup, which is put out by Monsanto, that also causes significant and dangerous health problems. And explain the issue to people. And you have to do it with very well put together television ads, because that's the main route of advertising these days in political campaigns. And these giant companies have poured millions of dollars into making their own ads to assure people that it doesn't matter what's in their food and everything is equal and it's going to cost people more to buy food, et cetera, all of these statements, which can be refuted, but it has to be done by political professionals, and unfortunately these are amateurs who are heading up these campaigns. They're basically businessmen who run health companies that are selling health food to the public, and they have relied on PR experts and advertisers, not advertisers, but other investors, experts, who have led them down the wrong path.
Well, then that kind of begs the question, are these experts doing it intentionally, do you think?
Well, I think there's possible indication that this is happening, that the campaigns may be infiltrated at the top. It's quite easy to do when you're working with amateurs. There were public polls taken as far back as 2011 that convinced these men who bankroll the ballot campaigns that the one single message that should be employed is you have a right to know what's in your food, and no other message. So we have to look into what's going on there. one of the most important of these polls was carried out by the Mellman Group on behalf of a group called Just Label It, which was co-founded by Gary Hirshberg, who is the CEO of Stonyfield Organic Farms in New England, and he is a significant political player in the state. He hosted presidential candidates coming up to the state during the campaign season in 2008, including Barack Obama, and also Tom Vilsack. And Hirshberg supported Vilsack as a presidential candidate until he dropped out of the race. Well, Vilsack was the governor of Iowa, and he received an award, a biotechnology award, Governor of the Year, from basically big agriculture. And Vilsack is now the Secretary of Agriculture, and he is most definitely pro-GMO. So why in the world would Gary Hirshberg be supporting a man like Tom Vilsack for president when his stance on GMOs is very obvious? In addition to that, Hirshberg is also allied in certain ways with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation and the Ford Foundation, in another large kind of think tank group that is looking for global solutions to agricultural problems. Well, these people that he's allied with, these big players, are again very much pro-GMO. So what's going on there? No explanation has come forth, no criticism or questions asked to Hirshberg. And I've tried to speak about this to campaign workers on the ground who are trying to get these ballot measures passed, and to let them know that they have to be sitting down with people at the top, like Hirshberg, and asking tough questions and demanding to know why there is only one message from these people, which is you have a right to know what's in your food.
Well, I mean, obviously, as you said, they're amateurs, and so one suspects that a lot of these folks are volunteers and don't know how to put it, but you know how young people can be. They can be pretty naive about stuff, and so maybe that's a huge element here. But I wonder about the higher levels. I think they must know what they're doing. By the way, you have somebody that you've interviewed or a lot. What do you call him? Francis McAvoy? Is that
Ellis Medavoy.
Ellis Medavoy. Okay, Ellis Medavoy. And now he understood how PR works, right? What do you think he would say about how this has been done?
Well, he not only understood how it worked, but he was a propaganda master on many significant issues, including medical issues, trying to and succeeding to paint pictures for the public of medical research, which turned out to be fraudulent, and his job was to make it seem as if it was, pristine and pure and wonderful for everybody. So he was, in a sense, working for what I call the medical cartel. He would say that, number one, this was a completely misguided kind of campaign, that when confronted with people who are committing crimes, and I'm talking now about big biotech, you have to reveal what those crimes are. You have to go after these people, hammer and tongs, because you're telling the truth and they're lying. It's very simple. And it's also very effective when you're telling the truth. It wakes people up. It gets them to question their own ignorance about the issue, and it gives them, the target. Who's doing this to the American public all over the country, who's growing this kind of food, who's forcing small farmers off their land, who is spraying tons and tons of toxic herbicide everywhere, et cetera, et cetera. That's the first thing he would say. And the second thing he would say is undoubtedly, as you pointed out, you have to look to the top of these campaigns because there is a very good chance that they are infiltrated and that they're taking advice from people who want these campaigns to fail. And the third thing he would probably say is, you've got to have professionals making these television ads because that's where all your money, or the bulk of your money, is going. That's how you communicate with the public. I've seen the ads that were run in the state of Washington, and they were really pathetic. I mean, there was nothing there except a young woman walking toward the camera, smiling and saying people have a right to know what's in their food. To say that these ads were soft is, a vast understatement. They were, like floppy spaghetti. They had no impact, no real message of any substance. And in fact, they would leave a lot of people wondering, why do we need to know about this kind of food that we're eating? Why do we have a right to know? Why do we need a right to know? What's the point here? What are you trying to get at? It's as if these campaigns are pulling their punches. As if, well, we're going to play nicey nice with the bad guys, and we're not going to try to attack anybody. We're going to be good people and just emphasize the positive and so on and so forth. Well, that's fine if you're selling health food products to the public. That's the way you do that as a businessman. But in a political campaign, when there is obvious evil involved, and you're pulling your punches and you're not mentioning the names of the companies who are destroying the food supply and trying to monopolize it, it's a sad thing.
Maybe they should have shown the rats with the tumors growing out of them in Russia.
Exactly. All I had to do, you put rats on the screen. There was a famous study, Seralini study, that shows, cancerous rats. Or you have a farmer standing there in front of the camera on a barren piece of land saying, my family's been on this land for 150 years, and now we have no more. This is the end. We've worked for many generations here, and now our future has been ruined by big biotech companies who have sold us a bill of goods about genetically engineered food that's created huge numbers of super weeds that are resistant to herbicide, and now we have to spray even more toxic herbicides on the land several times a year to destroy these weeds, and our future and your food is ruined. You start coming at people with this and other such ads, and all of a sudden, everybody wakes up. Now you put people on alert. And in fact, if your opposition, like Monsanto, suddenly claims that you're not telling the truth, you put up an ad that says, so sue us. Let's go to court. Let's have depositions. Let us, put you on the record with our scientists about your studies and how this toxic food was certified as safe to begin with. We're quite willing to go to court here. Let's go. Now you raise the stakes. Now you let everybody know that you're fearless. Now you have a real chance of not only winning, but in an overwhelming way. And now people in the public know why they should have a right to know what's in their food.
I guess most people would be afraid that the legal system is corrupt and co-opted, though, John.
Yes, they might be afraid of that, but, these are the risks you have to take. Otherwise, you're in this to lose. Why go in to lose? if you want to win, you've got to take chances.
You've
You
just
absolutely
gone.
have to.
Sorry, you've just given me a lot of information. I live in Ireland, and we've been wondering, my friends and I, just how things like this kept getting voted down in the U.S. because over here these products are labeled, and people don't buy them. But it just seems absurd that people wouldn't vote to at least have their food labeled. It just seemed very strange. And if the campaigns were being run like that, it does make sense, and it does sound to me very, very fishy, because they have done things over here. Like most people in Ireland have no clue that they are eating meat that is being fed us grain from genetically modified products. And I have to go to great lengths to get chicken feed, for example, that is non-GMO. And most chicken feed and most of the animal feed is GMO. So people are getting it sideways, but it's not labeled on the meat that they've been fed that. But if it's labeled on the can, they have learned that people just avoid it. I think it was a Monsanto executive or something that said it's like putting a skull and crossbones on it.
Right.
Which is really true, but they should. I mean, but if it's so wonderful, I keep saying they should. One thing that works really well, I've discovered with people who don't understand it, my friends in America, is they'll say, "So if it's so great, why don't they label it and push it? It's wonderful for you, see?" And then they go, "Oh, that will make them think." It's not just a matter of we deserve to know, but why don't we know?
Yeah, you're hitting the nail on the head there. See, that's another kind of ad that you would expect these campaigns to take out. You put an ad on with someone who can speak very forcefully, who says, look, just like you said, if this is so great, genetically modified food, why isn't Monsanto pushing to have it labeled so that people know how terrific it is? What's the problem here? Why are they stalling? Why don't they want you to know what kind of food you're eating? And all of a sudden people say, yeah, gee, I hadn't thought of that. So obviously people in Ireland have thought about it, at least to the degree that it's labeled. At least,
it's an EU wide. They have to label it in the EU. In fact, American products that come in, it's really interesting, because the same corporations and the same products, if they're like even being sent to the specialty store in Dublin, there's a store in Dublin that I can call if I want to say get Jiffy popcorn or whatever. You know, I don't know why, but if I say wanted that, or my husband wanted some corn syrup, that's actually a much better one to make some candy. And I could ask him, I could say, could you go read the label? And he said, oh, I'm sorry, it does have GMO products in it. I said, well, thank you for letting me know. I appreciate knowing, so I will look up another recipe. But I'll order something. And he was just, but see, you can't, and when I tell that story again to people in the States, or like my friend I've known for decades who married a Scotsman who's from America as well, I've known her for years, you know, she was going, what do you fear about these things? I'm going, well, it's not so much what do I fear, but why can't I, not just why can't I know, but if it's so good, you're a scientist, why don't they tell people? You know, you tell me why I should eat this.
Exactly.
And she has not said a word since.
Right. There's no answer to that, see. I mean, you're absolutely right. And that's the way the whole campaign should be formed. But it's not. It's absolutely not. And from my experience with the people who are running these campaigns, they certainly don't want to get into a dialogue with me. That's the last thing they want. And I've, fielded some criticism for writing probably by now at least a dozen, maybe 20 articles about all of this. And people have come back at me, why are you criticizing these campaigns? We're trying to do a good thing. And I say, look, trying to do a good thing is not the point. The point is to win. Is that why you're in this, to win? Or just so you can say you're a good person who is striving very hard to do something that you think is right? Don't you want to do both? And don't you want to look at what's effective? And that doesn't seem to make a dent on some of these true believers. They just want to, they work themselves to the bone, the volunteers out in the field. And some of them have worked so hard, they've sacrificed, they've lost their jobs, they've mortgaged their homes. It's a terrible story. And
hey, John.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt on this, but I mean, I think, you know, it's probably worth mentioning a couple of the articles that you wrote and how they really kind of touch some buttons and I think are quite relevant. One or two were about the idea of why don't we have a law to label murderers, right?
Yeah, right.
So why
Yeah,
don't we get a referendum together to label murderers? Right? I mean, the answer is, why do you want to label these guys? Why aren't we putting them in prison?
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. And I use the analogy in one of these articles. If you were living in a small neighborhood and somebody was spraying clouds of poison on their lawn and you could see the clouds drifting down the street, I mean, what are you going to do? Are you going to go to all the other neighbors and say, let's all promise not to use this toxic stuff on our lawns and then everything will be fine? Or are we going to go after the person who's actually doing it? Because that's the criminal. And so ultimately, what we were talking about here are criminal cases that are not being prosecuted because there is a partnership between the U.S. federal government and Monsanto and Syngenta and Dow and other giants in the biotech agriculture field. In fact, the U.S. government partners in sending representatives around the world to promote genetically modified food in other countries so that all of this can be exported to Africa, for example, which there's now a gigantic struggle on in Africa to resist GMO crops. So, this is crime at the highest levels here. The Department of Justice should be prosecuting these people long ago. When GMO food was first permitted back in around 1996 as commercial products to be sold in stores, the FDA certified it by saying, basically, we see no reason to do extensive testing because the corporations state that the food is safe. And then you go to the corporations and they said, well, the FDA has approved it, therefore we don't have anything to say about it, and we're just going to go on our merry way. Well, I mean, that was just a gigantic scandal that never made it into the major media. But nobody really tested extensively GMO food from the outset in America. The fix was in from the beginning, unlike in Europe. This was an American industry that was being promoted in the service, really, of monopolizing the food supply. That's where all this is going. The idea is to put the people of the planet under the gun by putting agriculture in the hands of giant corporations, relatively few corporations, so that then, up the road in the future, decisions could be made about who eats and who doesn't eat, about where food is shipped and where it isn't shipped, about who is going to get soy and who isn't going to. All of these machinations about genetically modified food, behind that is this push to dominate and own the food supply. That's where this has been going, and that's where it continues to go. So, yes, you're absolutely right. And I've been talking about this and writing about this for years, not just in the field of agriculture, but, for example, in the field of pharmaceutical medicine, because I've researched thoroughly this area, and it's known, published in mainstream journals, that the U.S. medical system is killing, at a conservative estimate, 225,000 Americans a year. 106,000 of those as a direct effect of FDA-approved pharmaceutical drugs. Well, if you start adding up those figures, 225,000 people a year means 2.25 million people killed every decade by the medical system, and over 1 million directly by pharmaceutical drugs. If that isn't a crime, what is? Where is the Department of Justice? The fix is in. It's been in since the beginning. And that's the answer. The real answer is to prosecute criminals, to put them in prison. But this has never been happening. And that's why you even need these ballot initiatives in the first place. There should be no need for them at all.
Have you come across eugenics type component to this, John? Like, isn't to sterilize us or dumb us down or anything like that? Or
well, I haven't come across anything direct in the way of a smoking gun where I can say, well, this particular gene that they're inserting in corn is going to sterilize the population and so on. But it's long been my opinion, based on some experience. We know that major foundations like the Rockefeller Foundation have been researching depopulation for a long time. And certain efforts in this regard, say with vaccines which contain a hormone connected with pregnancy, have been experimented with in the Philippines on women with the idea of making them basically miscarry. But these experiments are fairly limited. We do know, however, that if you start giving vaccines to people whose immune systems are already compromised, as in the case in the third world, certain parts of Asia, Africa, South America, and so on, that it just pushes those immune systems over the edge into, debilitation and death. These programs are underway, and to my way of thinking, the most effective strategy of the depopulationists is really to covertly try to sterilize the population gradually over time, because it's invisible. Oh, well, the birth rate is dropping in this part of Africa, and then studies are done that, pretend to know why, and they attribute it to all sorts of things that have nothing to do with it. So it's possible that at some point genetically engineered food could show the effect of lowered birth rate. Maybe not with the changes that have been deployed so far, but with new kinds of genetic insertions. But certainly the nutritional value of the food has been affected. That has been shown. And so if you're going to feed this kind of... Go ahead.
John, I thought that this had been shown with some animals like pigs, that the second generation is where some of this kicks in. And they really do become like half
some of this
infertile.
Meaning what?
Some of the genetically modified, like the second generation, half of them become infertile or something like that.
I've seen some reports of this. I mean, I'm not prepared to say that animal experimentation is always transferable to humans. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. So I'm not, ready to say you can therefore assume the same thing is going to be true with humans. But it could be. It could be.
I think it was a study with rats. And someone had things like blue penises and things like that, but a second and third generation. I'd have to look it up. But I have a question for you, actually, on the pharma. My husband is a mature medical student. He's in his first year. And he told me, I think last weekend, that he and his buddies are passing around a book called Bad Pharma. And he has just been absolutely shocked by it. I haven't read it yet because he actually, a friend of another student loaned it to him. He's going to loan it to another student. But I gather it's something of an expose from someone who was in the industry of some of what you're talking about with pharmaceuticals. And I'd like to know, what would you recommend people going into the medical field, what could they do?
Well, I'll tell you one thing that happened, and it sort of shows the difficulty of this. There was, at Harvard a couple of years ago, some kind of protest by medical students on this issue. It wasn't specifically targeting death and debilitation caused by pharmaceutical drugs, but it was certainly targeting the undue influence of pharmaceutical companies in medical training and in funding medical schools and so forth, because obviously the influence was there, and the whole point was to make medical students believe that pharmaceutical medicine was uniformly wonderful and great across the board and so on and so forth, and to design medical school training so that all doctors would in fact become, pharmaceutical reps once they opened their practices. And so this was a fairly lively protest, but unfortunately, it was all sort of settled by conversations and little meetings and assurances and this and that and the other thing, and everybody went back to business as usual. But this is where I think it has to go. It's not easy to do, but medical students need to get up on their hind legs and say, we want answers to these questions, and the questions can be very specific and well-formed. I mean, I'll give you a reference. July 26, 2000, Journal of the American Medical Association. Dr. Barbara Starfield was the author. She was at the time, she's now dead, a revered and respected public health expert at the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health. And her review was called, Is U.S. Health Really the Best in the World? And she was the one who laid out the figures. 225,000 deaths every year as a result of the medical system, 106,000 directly as a result of FDA-approved pharmaceutical drugs. Published July 26, 2000. Other such studies have been published. This is not a mystery or a secret. It's there in the literature. I interviewed her at length, maybe a year or so before she died. And I asked her a few pointed questions. I said, did the federal government ever get in touch with you so that you could consult in trying to fix this problem? Her answer was no. I said, to your knowledge, has the federal government done anything to try to remedy this problem? No. Well, medical students empowered with this kind of information can cause a great deal of what I would call good trouble by insisting on answers to these questions. And this could balloon into major stories. But it's not easy. These such students could be threatened. They could be threatened with suspension. Careers are on the line. It takes tremendous fortitude and guts to go forward with something like this. But that's one of the things that really needs to happen. And, the other thing is what I've been trying to do as a reporter for a long time, which is to open people's eyes to these facts that are suppressed in the mainstream so that regular people become much more circumspect and suspicious about pharmaceutical drugs and about the tendency of doctors to prescribe drugs for everything under the sun. So it has to be a multi-front campaign, and a book like Bad Pharma, and there are other books, contribute to that. But the powers that be have to be confronted directly.
I find it rather
Hey, John,
comforting that medical students are... Sorry.
No, go ahead, Disaster Cat.
Yeah, no, I just saying I thank you for that answer, and I just find it rather comforting that first-year medical students are kind of rebelling by passing this book around. Of course, these are all mature people, mature students who are in a special accelerated program for people who have advanced degrees, so a lot of them were already scientists and things before, but I think they may be some of the best people to question, and I just find it really encouraging that they're doing that, and I'll pass on your answer to him.
Good. Very good. You can find, by the way, if you just Google my name and Barbara Starfield, something to that effect, you'll see probably a number of articles. I mean, I've written about this, I don't know how many times, from one vector or another. And, they can use that information any way they want to.
I'll do that. I'll give him the information when he's home, when he can breathe, because he actually isn't even home 5 days a week. But thank you.
Yeah, I can imagine. Okay, sure.
Hey, John.
Yeah.
I think maybe it's worth going into something that you've researched and written about a lot, which is, in a sense, the problem is that people are stuck in the matrix, right? I mean, they really should know better. They really should be aware that these guys are murderers. The complex at the top that's pushing all these terrible foods and drugs and so on. And for some reason, a large percentage of people just can't see it. And so I was thinking you have a book called Escaping the Matrix, I guess it is.
Well, it's actually a very large collection. It's called The Matrix Revealed. And there's another one called Exit from the Matrix. There's a tremendous amount of audio material and text and so forth. People can find it at my website, No More Fake News. They can read details about what's in it. But yes, I go into this very often and very deeply. What is it that keeps people from seeing the truth? And there are multiple strategies, of course, that are deployed. You can go into the educational system. What is the educational system doing to young minds so that when they emerge, they are simply hypnotized and unprepared without any knowledge of how to analyze information and how to question the kinds of propaganda that are all around them, especially in this, age of information, as it's been called. But one of the major things...
Age of disinformation, John.
Yeah, age of disinformation, exactly. One of the major things that is deployed here to keep people asleep is in the medical arena, for example, and even in other areas. You put a label on something, an official label, and people buy it. For example, there are 300 or so officially certified mental disorders described in the Bible of the psychiatric profession, called the DSM. The 5th edition has just been released a few months ago. Each one of these disorders, like ADHD and oppositional defiance disorder and bipolar, etc., all of these things are labels. And people are hypnotized by labels. You give them a label that reminds them of some kind of, in this case, human behavior that they've seen or experienced, and they buy it. Okay, that's what it is. I was always wondering, what is this, tendency of people to behave in the following way and say, oh, well, it's bipolar. Oh, well, thank you so much, because now I know, you see. The label becomes the knowledge. The label becomes the assurance. The label becomes the answer to a mystery or to a question. It satisfies people. The professionals know because they've labeled it. So they understand how it works and where it comes from and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, as it turns out, and I've exposed this a number of times as well, for none of the 300 officially certified mental disorders is there any physical diagnostic test whatsoever. No definitive test. No blood test, no saliva test, no urine test, no hair test, no genetic scan, no brain scan, no nothing. Nothing. Zero. And I've talked to many medical doctors over the years, and, I've always steered the conversation around psychiatry, and the usual answer is, yeah, that's the biggest fraud going. It's an open secret. Because if there were any specific definitive diagnostic tests, they would be included in the DSM, in the Bible of the psychiatric profession, and they're nowhere to be found. They're not there. Instead, what you get are articles in the press about, researchers think they're getting closer to a genetic answer to Alzheimer's and to this, to that, and right around the corner, up the road, there's a great likelihood that we'll see a true answer to what clinical depression really is in terms of neurotransmitter activity, et cetera, chemical imbalance. All of these phrases are thrown around, but there's no test. There are no diagnostic tests. And I have psychiatrists on the record admitting this. So what do we have here? We have the most gigantic amount of fraud that you've ever seen in your life, backed up, of course, by pharmaceutical companies dispensing drugs. And it all starts with the label. The matrixology,
John,
if you will. Go ahead.
John, it makes me wonder, thinking about this, that maybe that labeling is such a key element, and maybe that's what in bad periods in the past, with priests or shamans or something, hundreds or thousands of years ago, maybe that's what they did. They, that's demon disorder, or that's, because that labeling, it creates a control grid, right? Because they're the experts. They're the only ones who can talk about it, right? You and I are basically unqualified to talk about the latest demon disorder that the Bible of psychiatrists has come up with.
I'm glad you brought that
right?
up. It's absolutely true.
It's the expert phenomenon.
The expert knows. We don't know, you see. The expert cooks up the label, and then we become, the victims, or we become the people who are asking for the special knowledge to be conferred upon us so that we can understand something about it. But sure, look at the practices of the Roman Church, medieval Europe. I mean, that's a gigantic history that is extraordinarily instructive to understand, You have a group of women who are involved in healing, and all of a sudden they are labeled. These are witches, and they must be exterminated because they're obviously under the influence of Satan, a label. Well, who is Satan, by the way? Could you explain that? You say to your priest, and he says, well, yes, of course, because I have special knowledge. I'm, in fact, your pipeline to God. As a member of the church, you can approach God only through me. That's the setup of the Roman Church, and it always has been, with good reason from a point of view of control. And so I will instruct you about Satan. And when I'm finished, not only will you understand, but you will be terrified. This is the surveillance state version in medieval Europe. Satan is always there. He's always trying to affect your behavior. God is watching, and therefore you have to obey the dictates of the church in your behavior, thought, action, etc., etc. And if you stray, then you're a heretic. That's another label. And that's a very specific label. And we will put you on trial and determine whether or not you should be, tortured and so forth and so on. Yes, absolutely. Since the dawn of time, the priest classes, or we now have the secular religion, the doctor in the white coat who knows everything. All he has to do is pronounce the label, and everything is settled. Okay, well, if you say it's, bipolar, well, that's what it is then. So what do I do? And then you get the answer and the drug, and you go for it. And this is...
And what's also frightening looking at the Western world today is you see a kind of Soviet Nazi phenomenon where mental, psychic kind of disorders, that's when you don't go along with things, right? I mean, you might know the terms, but I mean, disobeying disorder or something like that nowadays, right?
Yeah, exactly. You see more and more of that.
This is most frightening because, if you, it could be anything, but if you question the Kennedy assassination, that might be proof that you've got some kind of disorder.
Look at what's happened in the wake of these mass shootings in America. Obama announced two new programs. One is establishing mental health centers all over the United States as a means of prevention of this kind of thing, so that hopefully it won't happen again. These people can get treatment, et cetera, et cetera. And a gigantic brain mapping project which actually has been
that's
underway already, but it's now going to receive additional funding. And the whole idea is that the experts will now be able to tell us in 10 or 15 years, this is how, 750 trillion neurons in your brain really operate, and therefore we can tell you what condition you're in. And if you happen to be a political dissident, then we can label this, and we can even go into the physiology of it. And then you are committed. You must receive treatment. This is where they're heading with this. They are heading toward a police state of the mind. And they want to get there as soon as possible. And I can tell you definitively from other research that I've done, they don't care. The truth is not the issue. That's the last thing that they care about. What they care about is floating a convincing cover story to assure one and all that they understand how the mind works, that the mind is the brain and nothing else, that there is nothing else to understand, and therefore they can use whatever labels they want to designate people in whatever way they want to and to treat them forcibly if necessary. And that's the incursion on freedom that they want to be able to accomplish. It's not going to be easy for them, but that's where they're going. That's what they want to do. And they use every occasion they can, every event, to pump that up and to tell an unthinking public, this is the answer, you see. If this guy who ended up with a gun somewhere had only gotten treatment beforehand, this never would have happened. And therefore, we have to catch this early. So we need to screen people. You see programs to screen school children with questionnaires to try to detect certain so-called mental disorders at a very young age and to treat these kids, criminally treat these young children with, say, antidepressants like Prozac, Zoloft, Paxil, which are incredibly toxic drugs and have numerous adverse effects, among which is to stimulate people into committing violent acts. So this is we
it's a hell of a
talking about
vicious
labeling.
cycle there.
Yep.
I mean,
it
they're
is.
creating the problem that they're supposedly fighting
Exactly.
with all of these weird
Exactly.
drugs. Well, in the few minutes we have left, though, I mean, in terms of the idea of exiting the matrix, in terms of trying to get people to wake up, I mean, we kind of see the problem a bit. But can you give us any suggestions, any thoughts? I mean, there's like the personal side, but then there's also the people we're around. It's still a mystery to me why
Yes.
so few people can realize the problem, but
Well, we have an opportunity with the internet, and I see that some fruit is being born here because people are waking up, because there is a sufficient amount of freedom in that space to expose the kinds of things that we're talking about here and many other things as well that go on outside of traditional media, outside of the traditional educational system. I've had many, many students write to me and say, you really awakened me with this piece and so on, and I've been reading other of your articles and so on. And you know that these kids are no longer going to be hypnotizable by the educational system in which they find themselves. People are breaking out of this all over the place. Politically speaking, everything has to be done to preserve and guard individual freedom, because that's always the bottom line. The powers that be want to say freedom is not the issue. The issue is a better world, and we're bringing it about, and we need your cooperation. Freedom, individual freedom, is, from their point of view, on the way out, and that's the way they want it. And every means possible to protect that space of freedom has to be accomplished. For example, the ability of people to say no to a doctor's prescription. which, people say, well, of course, I don't have to take a drug if I don't want to. Yes, but you can see creeping in at the edges a new kind of situation here where that is not necessarily going to be the case up the road. People can be put in a lockdown psych ward for 72 hours of observation when authorities believe that they might be, dangerous, et cetera, et cetera. And there are certain politicians who want to expand that kind of thing. When you have certain national health insurance programs, and I can tell you especially in America, I don't know about in other countries, but the plan is really to enroll everybody in a system in which eventually, when a doctor prescribes a drug and puts on a label on a person, the person is going to have to take that drug. Otherwise, they're going to be threatened with expulsion from the system. Why are you sitting in my office? I'm the doctor. I just diagnosed you. You're covered under insurance. I'm prescribing this to you, and you say you don't want to take it. And I see from your record that there was another situation like this several years ago where you declined to take a certain drug. We have people waiting outside to see me right now. Do you want to continue to be part of this program? This kind of pressure, coercion can be deployed, and it can get even worse than that. We have to protect the freedom that allows people to make choices, because then at least we buy time to educate enough people so that they wake up. If freedom is lost, well, then what good is the education factor? So I could talk a long time about this, but, in a few minutes, those are my best recommendations.
Well, thanks. I mean, I actually see a lot of positive going on. It's not just within the U.S. I actually live in Asia, but I think around the world, there is a lot that's going on. A lot of people have lost faith in the whole propaganda regime coming out of the U.S. And
I agree with you.
Once you lose faith in a certain item, like let's say vaccines or whatever, GM foods or something, it's much, much easier to start to have doubts about, the democracy we've given Libya or something like that. It's kind of a package, I guess is what I'm saying. Waking up is a package. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is infectious, and that's a good thing. In the early 1990s, I participated significantly in what people were calling the health freedom movement in America, which was the right of people to, manage their health according to their own dictates, because the FDA at that time was threatening to limit the range of access to food supplements, and certain nutritional companies were getting scared, and so they began to bankroll, popular resistance movement. And so in the process, I met some real radicals. I mean, in the health field, people who were dyed in the wool, determined to protect their own freedom and the freedom of everybody else to manage their health, in whatever way they want to choose to do it. And to me, that was the heaviest grassroots revolution that I've ever seen in my lifetime. And when I talked to these people, and I started talking to them about other issues, political issues, economic issues, and so forth, they caught on at the speed of light. It wasn't just health anymore. These people, as you say, it's infectious from one issue to another. You wake up to one significant thing, and then you say, well, if they're lying through their teeth about this, how can I trust them over here? Or there, or there, or there. So you're exactly right. That's the good infection, and that's what we need to promote more of. And I think it is working. I see untold numbers of people who contact me who are definitely waking up all the time. So that's a very good thing.
John, we've been discussing the GMO labeling and the kind of failure, but then if you go back to that time, where health supplements, the supporters of that succeeded to a large degree. I'm reminded in Florida there was an FDA Holocaust Museum. I don't know if you ever got a chance to go to that. But but
I
I
know
did,
about that.
and that's the kind of spirit that gave us the health freedoms we've had for the last 20 years. I mean, that was taking it to them.
Right. Yeah,
and
taking it to
we
them.
won. We won that fight. We took it to them, and there were people who put themselves on the line to the extent of, on a major road in Florida, near Miami, in Fort Lauderdale, you could see this is where the FDA Holocaust Museum is, and that's kind of what we need to return to. The wimpishness just isn't going to cut it, I think. But on that note, John, I think we want to thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Kind of want to wrap it up here. I don't know if there are any last comments or thoughts you want to give us.
No, I think I've made my last comments and thoughts. I've enjoyed the conversation very much. I had no idea where it was going to go, but this is exactly the kind of thing that I like to talk about, so I appreciate it very much.
Well, we appreciate you and all your work over the decades. I remember your stuff back in L.A. in the early 1980s. It was great stuff. So thanks, everybody. Oolong, Disaster Cat, thanks for coming along.
Thanks, John.
Thank you for having us,
you.
and thank our guest.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, John, we really do appreciate what you've been doing. Keep up the good work, and we'll keep in touch. Take care.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye.